Hey everybody, it's Jason Creel and you're watching The Lawn Care Life. I'm at Graham Spray Equipment today. This video is sponsored by Graham, and I'm in Douglasville, Georgia, and this is Teddy Mathis, and Teddy's one of the sales reps here at Graham. And the good thing about talking with Teddy is he is one of us. He's been in the business and got a lot of experience, and somebody I've actually sat down with and gotten advice from my own weed control and fertilization business. So today I want to take the opportunity to kind of pick Teddy's brain and get some advice on marketing, on how to get your customers, and what we can do to be successful in this industry from somebody who's a veteran. So we're going to do that. All right, Teddy, you came and spoke at our conference a couple years ago, and I think people could relate to you because they could tell that you were one of the lawn care guys that just happens to be selling spray rigs, and I think that made you very relatable. So we wanted to gain some of your knowledge again today. So if somebody, people that follow me on YouTube and things like that, they want to know, how do I get started in this? Because it can be a little intimidating to start a weed control and fertilization company. So let me ask you first about just where do you go to get the initial knowledge? If you say, I've been mowing grass, maybe I understand a little bit about business, but how do I know what to spray to kill a certain weed or when to spray it? What would you advise somebody in that situation?
Well, there's a couple resources. Obviously, whatever state you're in, your Department of Agriculture will offer. You gotta be licensed for this. So obviously that's the first spot, but there's also the companies that sell the product. Typically they have many resources for it, but also nothing is better than having a mentor in business, somebody who can guide you in your market, because what works here in the lawn care world in Atlanta may not apply to you if you're in a different zone.
Well, I get people ask me on YouTube, they say, hey, I live in Oregon, how do I kill this weed? And that's something, a weed I've never seen before because I am in Alabama, so you're right, it can be very regional. I mean, there's some basic principles that maybe cross regional lines, but certainly weeds, like animals in some ways, they don't all live in every state. So as far as marketing, if you're going to go about starting, because I tell people all the time, if you're mowing lawns, you might have 50 customers and make a living, but spraying, you're doing maybe 6 to 12 apps a year, and maybe some people even less than that, but you got to have a lot more customers. So it can be intimidating to think, wow, I got to go out there and get hundreds of customers to get going. So what are some of the things that you think have seen work in marketing, and maybe when you had your business, how did you market to gain customers?
Well, today that has changed quite a bit. I mean, most of your marketing efforts today, social media, online things. But of course, there's some good old tried and true methods. Obviously asking for referrals from the existing customers you have, knocking doors if that's legal where you are, passing out flyers, every door direct mail through the postal service, that kind of thing. I will say in marketing that if you can, in the lawn care business, typically people has to have some spendable income. And so I targeted a specific market and above, because that's where you're going to get your best bang for your dollar.
No, Teddy, being a salesperson, one of the things that you have to do is listen to people and kind of understand their situation. And you might get somebody who calls you who's mowing lawns and they're wanting to add spray into their mowing business, or maybe if somebody's wanting to do just spray. And what are some of the thoughts that you have, or maybe conversations you can recall with those kind of people? Do you try to push them toward just spraying, or do you say, hey, you can mow and spray, or what's kind of the pros and cons of doing those options?
Well, in my experience, I owned a full-service lawn care company, and I can tell you I feel that was a mistake. The margins and the scalability, more than anything, in the spray world is much more possible than in the mowing world. But it depends on how you want to run your business. For me, I wish I would have concentrated just on spray. I had peers of mine that came in with me that honestly, those guys have businesses today that do between $7 and $14 million a year, and mine was only a little $1 million company after 17 years. So
All right, so what about managing people? You talked about scalability, meaning that my understanding that you can grow it past yourself, you can get multiple trucks out there running, and one reason you can do that, from my experience, is that the profits are higher, and so you can afford to pay somebody. And then, of course, here in the South, we can spray weeds year round. It's a year-round business, which is great as far as scaling and keeping employees on year after year. But with that comes managing the employees, and I know that makes some people nervous, just the even thought of having an employee and I'm responsible for this person, or what if they screw up and I'm responsible for it. So what were some of your advice and maybe experiences dealing with employees, and do you try to talk to people about that? Because some people are content to be solo for 30 years, and then some people want to grow as fast as possible and have as many trucks on the road as they can.
Yeah, one of your guys that spoke at the Lawn Care Life program was talking about two different types of businesses. You've got one that is a lifestyle business that is maybe for yourself, and then you have a more larger business. I can tell you I had 14 employees, and the thing with managing people is that every one of them is different. And so employees need maintenance just like your spray rig or your lawnmower or whatever, except it's a lot more complicated piece of machinery. So I would say before you scale or as you scale, spend just as much time in learning leadership, learning different personality types, how to deal with that. And there's some great resources out there on leadership. John Maxwell is who I always followed, and some great podcasts and stuff out there for that. But there's an old saying in business that the best piece of equipment that you'll ever own is your people, and the worst piece of equipment you'll ever own is your people. So it's quite dynamic. Like I said, I had 14 employees, and I could tell you some stories. So it's good and bad. When
you were managing 14 people, did you find, as you being a business owner, were you more of a hands-on micromanager type, or did you kind of let them play their own game and let them, a player's coach, if for lack of a better term, or how did you manage them?
Well, that has to be a combination of both, because if you want good people around you and you recruit good people, leaders has to lead. That's in their ability to do so. And I was very micromanaging in the beginning. I had all the fears of, gosh, what if they do this or that? And I was on an airplane going on a missions trip, and a buddy of mine owned a very, very successful construction company. And he asked me, he said, Teddy, do you think the person that's flying this plane owns it? And I said, no. He said, well, this plane's worth about $300 million. He said, you got to learn to delegate. So, but it is a combination of both, because if you let them do whatever, then it's not necessarily scaling your vision and what you wanted to produce. So you got to learn both.
And as far as retaining employees, sometimes you worry about, I put all this effort and time into training somebody, and then they leave, it wasn't for them. So did you try to find somebody when you're hiring that already had experience, or did you prefer to bring somebody in that was green and craft them the way you wanted?
Really, I never made my decision based on their experience level. What I was looking for was good character traits. Were they hardworking? Were they honest? Did they have a good moral compass? Things of that nature. So that's my answer to that. But with employee retention, you can only do the best you can do. Again, in the spray world, we can pay more than typically in the mowing world, so that helps. But overall, people are complicated. So you do the best you do, treat people right, treat them the way that I believe that the Lord would be proud of you, and then ultimately they make their decisions. I had some that worked with me for 15 years, and I had some that I had to replace every year. So.
And did you try to keep some of them? How did you keep them, as far as did you offer them some kind of quarterly bonus or something to keep them motivated, or do you have an annual review, or you might give them a raise? Or is there any tips you'd have on if you get somebody that's good and you don't want to lose them? I mean, what do you do to keep them around?
I absolutely gave bonuses. Like when we would do landscape projects or my spray guys, whatever, if we had to catch back up or we had stellar weeks or whatnot, I never wanted to be stingy with the money. I would share it to the best I could anyway.
We talked about earlier, some people running up north, maybe they doing just 5 apps a year because their calendar's a little limited, and down here it seems like people are doing anywhere from 6 to 12 apps. So what are your thoughts on kind of the number of apps and pros and cons of doing less apps or more apps?
Well, the number of apps really is dependent upon where you're at in the country and located. There are different zones in America, and you need to know that if you're going to spray what zone you're in. That zone meaning what the weather patterns are, what average temperatures are, what types of soil that you have in that. In order to determine how many apps you need to understand what that ground needs agriculturally. Now, the only key of it in this business is that there's also a thing called competition. So you can't, I can tell you that most companies though do very close to what agriculturally the grass needs, and that will determine your apps.
All right, Teddy, I'll just admit here on camera that I have actually failed in another business. I one time started a coupon book fundraising company. That was a horrible idea. Don't ever do that if that's you're thinking about that being your retirement plan. But one thing it did fail, and that made me realize how good a business that lawn care truly is, and especially now I'm doing weed control and fertilization. I tell people all the time, you make $1,000 every day. I mean, and that's not even some exaggerated great day. That's just sort of normal. Of course, there's expenses. It's not always profit, but one person in one truck consistently goes out there and makes $1,000 a day, and that's not bad money for most of us. So just if you pick up on that point as far as lawn care, sometimes people look at it about the initial cost, or I've got to go buy this spray rig or this truck, and like almost no business you can get in for free. So what is your thoughts on just the lawn care industry as a business in general?
Well, like I said, I've been in this business for 25 years this year, and I moved to Atlanta to be a financial planner. That was the reason I came down here and fluked into the lawn care business. And you're right, there's very few businesses that you can go out every day, invest a relatively small amount of money, and go and produce $1,000 a day. You and Dave went over that 400-gallon unit earlier. That unit is, somewhere, depending on what you do with it, is between $9,000 and $13,000. But it can produce $1,000 a day, and most of your profit margins on a single guy, typically, or a sole operator, is somewhere between 40 and 50%. So you're making $500 a day. So when you talk about return on investments and things like that, even these bigger trucks, I mean, this truck behind me, I won't say exactly what it costs because it's a customer of mine, but it was a lot. But the thing is that thing's equipped daily to produce $2,400 a day. So, and it will run for the next 15 years and produce whatever that dollar amount is. You figure $6-7 million probably this thing's gonna produce. So that's the wonderful thing about the spray business. Now you can't do that in mowing as well, but that can be done in this spray business.
All right, so sometimes people get out there and they're spraying, and there's extra services. You got people, they want to do a tree and shrub program, or they're out there controlling fire ants or working in the flower beds, or what are some of the extra services that you see people offer along with their weed control and fertilization business that make sense, that are profitable?
Well, definitely tree and shrub care. That's the biggest second one and to be honest with you, it's the most profitable type of spray that you can do. Here in Metro Atlanta and in this zone in South, obviously we have a lot of insect pressure, mosquitoes and all that. Now you do have to have a license for most of those individually, but it's well worth it. Again, controlling fire ants, fleas, ticks, spiders, those kind of things, so that your family can enjoy the yard, keeping the fleas off your dogs, things like that. And additional services like that are extremely profitable. They've made up about 35% of my business.
And along those lines, when you talk about profitability, I know this is something I have to kind of evaluate my program, because as you have different herbicides that you can use that'll control weeds, and some are not that expensive and some are very expensive, and I'm always trying to balance like delivering an outstanding result for the customer but at the same time being profitable. So as far as like profitability, how did you go about that, or what advice would you give? Not, maybe along the lines of your program and which products you're putting on the lawn, but other tips you might have for being a profitable company.
Well, you're right. I mean, there are chemicals out there for everything, and some of them are very expensive and worth every dime, because the most expensive thing you'll ever do in this business, in my opinion, is with your chemicals and with your equipment, is to buy cheap stuff that ends up costing you in the chemical world. There's nothing more expensive than going back and doing free apps. You're not getting paid for that time and energy and all that. So I do suggest using the very best chemicals that you can find, but that doesn't always mean that they're the most expensive. So as far as your equipment, people say, I hear it daily, I can get that X sprayer for cheaper. And I'm like, yeah, I bought 2 of those, and they lasted me 4 or 5 years. And all 4 pieces of Graham equipment that I own, I sold it in 2017. One was a little 200 poly tank that I bought back in 2000. It was still running, made me hundreds of thousands of dollars. So profitability, you got to watch it. Any business person, you've got to watch your number. You've got to know your numbers, number one. That's the biggest failure in this business that I see, is that we have a lot of good, hardworking guys that they're awesome, but they're not necessarily good business people. They don't know if they're making money or not, or this or that. You've got to know that stuff, guys.
I think I've seen that. Sometimes I'll be out there and I'll look at the end result for the year, and I'm like, hey, I had a pretty good year. But sometimes I don't look at the individual customers or individual yards, and if I really crunch the numbers, I might look that I'm barely making anything off some of the customers, and some of them is where others are where I'm really generating my profit. So sometimes I encourage people not just look at your overall numbers for your whole business, but even individual neighborhoods and yards even, and say, am I making money on that particular account?
Well, the way my pricing schedule was, number one, it was fair, but I set up per 1,000 square feet pricing, and everybody paid the same because of that thing right there. Is I wanted every yard profitable for me, but also to where I could afford on every lawn to treat it and give it the very best result I can, and you can only do that if you're making money.